All right. Here we are with another episode of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee drink, my coffee cup, and of course we have another great guest here with us. Doc, listen, we've been organizing these coffee talks as a way to introduce people to our WPC family, our WPC network and community. We just want folks to know about all the great people doing great work, not just at the conference, but also when they get back to their community. So let's just get started by asking you, who are you and what is the work that you do?
Well, sure. Thanks for having me on your Coffee with the Founder. My name is Tina Paone, and I am a professor at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey. I physically live in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, so just outside of Philadelphia. So what do I do? Well, I'm a counselor educator. So first and foremost, I'm teaching students who are set to become either school counselors or student affairs professionals about the counseling field. And so how that mixes with diversity, specifically race, is that our entire program is infused with social justice. So we start them day one learning about biases, and we follow them through for 2 years, teaching them everything that we have knowledge of. And we're a team, it's not just me. We work together class to class, making sure our students are really recognizing all the different privileges and the disadvantages that different individuals face, all similarities and differences between people. Not a real traditional sense of the program where you just learn counseling skills. You have to learn them from every lens, both privileged and oppressed groups, and how that works with your counseling practice. So that's my main focus, is the work I do as a professor. In addition to that, one of the things that I do is I run something called the Central Jersey Consortium for Excellence and Equity, which is a series of programs that run throughout 3 of the counties in New Jersey. It's a collaboration with different school districts in Monmouth County, Ocean County, and Middlesex County, where we bring together large groups of social justice teams that are wanting to learn more about social justice and implementation within the K-12 system. So obviously you were our guest speaker this year and came out to 3 of our 4 presentations. The final one, we got hit with the pandemic. But we start that process where our teachers and our counselors and our principals and superintendents are sending teams over to our institution to learn about how to implement a different protocol within their K-12 schools. What happens prior to you coming to campus, or any presenter that I have coming to campus, is we do a student conference where we energize the students. We usually have about 150 students who learn about different social justice activities that they can implement at their K-12 school. And we do that because students hear best from their fellow classmates as opposed to adults. So we've been doing that conference since 2013. It's been really beneficial for kids. Again, we have middle school and high school students that are coming out, implementing work. They come back again in June, although this year they will not be coming back. But what they do is they spend their entire school year working on these social justice projects that they implement under some guidance of adults who have also attended our conference, but they're the ones doing the work. And so that's really powerful to watch what these students come up with by the end of the year. So that's kind of part of what I do as far as service goes at our institution. So that's all run through the School of Education at Monmouth, which is also a big plus. And then, of course, my own research, my own presentations, everything that I am doing with colleagues has to do with race disparities. So I research a lot and I write a lot and publish a lot on race and racism, whiteness, understanding privilege, and how that all mixes together, again, back to the counseling world. So that's what I spent a lot of time doing, is just influencing kind of that counseling angle. And then I will say that I have to bring it home, and I tell people that ask about my work all the time, is that it has to come home. I can't just do this stuff at work. I have to bring it home. I have 3 sons. They are all, 3 of them are white boys. So we have a lot of conversation about race in our house and how different things that they do or get away with as teenagers are not things, if their skin tone was a different color, that they'd get away with. So there's a constant discussion in our house about race. Sometimes I think to their, they get overwhelmed with mom, just the constant, I know, it's because I'm white. And that is their response when I go to give them, I guess, information about something that has just occurred. So that's me in a nutshell. It's kind of how I spread it out throughout my life, the work that I'm doing. It can't just be at my workplace, but it has to be in my home environment as well, in my own community. I think otherwise I would just be very fake. So that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about all those, different areas of the consortium, but also the university, the students, but also in addition to your home. But before that, I was going to just ask you to talk about school counselor, right? When I hear school counselor, think about school counselor. I mean, I went to high school in the 80s, right? So how has the school counselor position changed over the years? And what exactly is that job of school counselor?
So the school counselor is now have many roles. So when you went to school, you probably remember your school counselor being the person who said, hi, what colleges are you going to go to? And maybe they knew your name and maybe they didn't know your name. It was very rare that your school counselor spent time talking to you about any sort of random life issues, unless it was a big crisis going on in your life. And then they would step in, but you'd see them for a short period of time and then you wouldn't hear from them again. And that was my experience as well, is I found some school counselors that I knew who they were. I knew how to get there, but most of the time it was about, did I fill out the right application for college, or what colleges was I planning on applying to? Now the school counselor has that role of social emotional components, career, and life. So a school counselor is going to be working in all those areas. Another thing that a school counselor is now doing is character education. So they're going into classrooms, talking about different issues. And again, depending on which program they came through, a master's program somewhere in the US will depend on how much they focus on similarities and differences and how much they focus on other topic areas. So that really becomes a personalized choice.
Yeah, and so the counseling field, is it as wide as the teacher field? I mean, what's the typical profile of the school counselor, particularly as it relates to, as you mentioned, a broadening a need to do an expansive amount of things different than what they did 20 years ago, but also a growing diversity population of students that they have to serve? Has the school counselor profile changed? I mean, what does the counselor look like, skills they have, challenges they're facing around issues of diversity and leadership and some of the complexities that may show up with students and families?
So traditionally, the school counselor is white female, and it's very similar to what the teaching field looks like. That does not reflect the students within those schools. And so I can't change the race of the school counselors. Of course, we could do a good job recruiting students of color to come into counseling programs, and that's ideal. But I also need to make sure that school counselors are being trained properly and looking at themselves, understanding their own privilege, before they start working with students who look different from them, who are different from them. That's the angle I have to take. So if I have a lot of white females coming into a program, I need to make sure that I'm teaching white females to be able to recognize, not just recognize, but know their own place so that they are not in a place of sympathy, because that's not helpful either. It's what do I do with the information that I have and how do I help students accordingly? And so that's really what we need to work on.
Well, I think it's safe to say we can almost predict that some of the issues coming back to schools after this pandemic may have not been in our school books or university guides. What are some of the things you're thinking from a counselor education perspective as you look at or experience the pandemic, COVID-19, and some of the challenges that may be coming back to schools or people may be even dealing with right now virtually?
I mean, I think we have so many disparities that people are so unaware of, because, you know, I can sit in my home and I can talk to you via Zoom and it's no problem. My connection's great, but that's not the case for every student. You know, I've been talking a lot about this with my own students. How are you getting food? Are you getting food? So first, again, I have to recognize my own privilege. I'm able to get food. I'm able to order, you know, whatever to be delivered to my home. And I'm doing a good job not having to go out, but that's because of my privilege. So what about my students, or what about these K-12 students that can't go and order online because there's an extra delivery fee that just, they can't cut it because there isn't the income coming into the home. You're waiting a really long time to have items delivered. So you had to have all this access, right? And so we have to talk about this access that isn't there. And so from a counseling perspective, we're looking at what have been the disparities, what are students coming back with, what did students deal with during this pandemic that we are not asking those questions. When we look at it surely from a counseling perspective, yes, counselors have been available to students during this pandemic, but everybody's at home. So right now, you know, if one of my children wanted to talk to their school counselor on Zoom or on Google Hangouts or whatever they're doing, I'm physically in the home, so I can hear them. And so if there's something going on that those students need to be talking about to their counselors, they're probably not doing it with the entire family over their shoulder. So, you know, we have this concern that students that have issues, and this isn't specifically a diversity or social justice issue, but the idea of abuse that is happening in homes, that we are not, you know, where school was that respite. School isn't that respite right now. Those students can't go to school. They can't go out on the playground. They can't go out of their home. So they're stuck in environments that may not be as healthy as when they're able to go to school. So we have a whole slew of issues that are going to come back. Top that off with students' anxiety about COVID-19, and that will depend on how anxious they are as individuals. Some students are obviously more concerned and more afraid of how that's going to look when they go back to school. And then, of course, depression, that we have students stuck at home with family, that everybody's situation doesn't look the same. It may be happy in your home. It may not be happy in my home. We don't know that for kids. And so we really have to be very mindful when students are coming back. So what kind of access, anxiety, depression, what was going on in your home, what kind of medical issues were faced in your home that we don't know about. Lots of different pieces, I think, coming back after a pandemic. That's where I think we are.
Yeah, it's lots of question marks there. What I was also thinking as you were talking is often in our research, in our programming, and our planning, rightfully so, we're doing and giving some attention to those who are on the tough side of the situation. But I often wonder if what we should be doing in challenging and preparing those of the privileged under, like you were saying, those of us who have no worries about food or drink or shelter in place. I'm wondering, like, what are we or what should we be saying and talking to our kids about those of us in these privileged positions, so that when they go back to school, they're hopefully having a broader sense, because it can be really, I think, easy to feel like to lose sight of some real important things during shelter in place as a super privileged person. What's your sense of that?
I mean, I think definitely honest, appropriate, or developmentally appropriate conversations with our own kids is the way to go. So, you know, I like to use my boys as an example because I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, but I also have an 11-year-old. So they developmentally hear things very different from each other. So I think that it's really important that we have those honest conversations. What does it look like? What information is being spread amongst even just the social media that my kids are looking at? And how does that play an influence into their own kind of interpretation of what this pandemic looks like? And how will that affect when they go back to school? Will they ask questions, or will they assume that everyone had it the same way that they did? Will they assume that no one went hungry? Will they assume that no one had any issues regards to, I don't know, whatever piece you want to bring into there, but how will those interactions look if we don't have conversations? So it's important, again, developmentally appropriate depending on their age group, on what information and how much they're being shared with. So again, I don't want my 11-year-old watching the world news every night, but I do want him to be aware of what's happening and how that may be affecting other individuals and what that looks like for them, and what would it be like for you if, you know, we didn't have dinner tonight? Or what would it be like for you if, you know, you did decided to go walk around the neighborhood and people were, you know, yelling at you because of the way that you looked? And so those kind of conversations are, again, very important. And I think that will help bring them back into being caring individuals when they come back with other students who didn't have the same experience.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder, you know, as a parent of 3 white boys, you know, like how that could be different, particularly when you look at a lot of the research and a lot of the books that are produced around white privilege or white supremacy, or, you know, addressing some of these issues from the vantage point of the power and privilege to do good things. They're usually Robin DiAngelo, you know, Peggy McIntosh, you know, Debbie Irving. Maybe every now and then there's a Tim Wise or Paul Gorski sighting, right? But I'm wondering, as a mom of 3 white boys, what are the things that, if you were speaking to another group of moms about this time, that you would be advising them to be making sure you're paying attention to some things specifically as relates to being parents of white boys that may be different than any other kids?
I think recognizing privilege is one of those things that I don't want to say beat over their heads, but talking to other parents about what do you tell your kids, or what do you talk about? Because as a mom of white boys, I don't have to talk to my kids about race. I don't have to talk to them about racism. I don't have to. I choose to. And so if I'm talking to other white parents, usually what I hear is that they don't talk about these things. It's not necessary. So, you know, there's a couple articles out there how white parents should be talking to their white children about racism. And so it's taking that initiative to do that, to have that conversation. But I will tell you, it's very difficult as a mom, especially as my kids get older. I noticed that, of course, they're questioning more, they're bucking more. They don't want to hear what I have to say anymore. So they're, you know, sometimes will almost push back with things that I don't want to hear either. So it becomes more of an interactive, is no longer I'm just listening to what you're saying, Mom. It's no, I don't agree, and here is why. And so that can become, I think, frustrating, and talking to other parents about, that conversation is hard, and to be persistent and always have that conversation so many parents will just give up because, again, they don't have to have the conversation. So it's really easy for them to say, you know what, I tried and I'm done. So my encouragement is to keep having those conversations, even though they get very difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean that's I think a really important topic as we look at this, time we're in, shelter in place. I was going to ask you about your research. You talked a little bit about some of the work and research you're doing around race and disparities. Can you just give me a sense as you watch these disparities play out around COVID-19 and the work and research you've done? I mean, what's going through the head of a professor as you watch what's going on right now and think about the work you've already done and looking ahead and the work that needs to be done? Can you give me a sense of what's going through your mind during this time?
Great question. I think, of course, everything that I research and look at, I want to think about how I'm going to implement into my classes. And so right now, I will say there is just a bombardment of new articles and new pieces of news media that are coming out every day. So when I first started teaching this topic, it would be every once in a while I'd pick up an article and be able to pull it into my classroom. And now it's coming in so quickly, I've had to kind of readapt. Where do I put that? And, there may be 6 or 7 news sources coming out with the same piece of information, which in a way is just highlighting what has already existed. It was already there. It's just now being reported more. So I talk to students about the fact that, we may have only seen articles come out every once in a while before, but it was still happening. Now media has decided to pick up on these articles and they're putting them out more. So finding a way for students to, read through a lot of this material or pick through a lot of the material that is now coming out and having real live discussions about what they're finding and what they're seeing and how that is, I guess, being exposed more. Our only resources right now are obviously digital media and the TV and maybe on, Sirius Radio or other radio shows. That's where we're getting all of our information right now. So what I'm finding is students are constantly sending me things, which is encouraging. At least they are paying attention and they say, oh, where should I put this? Oh, let me send it to Dr. Paone. She'll know what to do with it. And so that's how I think as a counselor, as an educator, as I'm thinking, there's a lot of different areas that we need to be talking through. There's a lot more talking points that, although I may have realized existed before, now students, they have a harder time denying that this is what's happening when the news is kind of pouring it out a little bit more effectively and essentially daily. And some of those comparisons that they can make now, I want to use the scene I keep seeing on the news from where the Michigan folks were standing in the state Senate area or the legislature, and there was a line of officers standing there with their masks on and people just with their weapons yelling and screaming at them. And the officers stood there very stoically. They didn't move in on them. They just kind of let them yell. They kept themselves very kind of neutral faced. And I really encourage students to think about, if all of those men were men of color, what would that have looked like? Would those officers stayed there in this neutral space? Because that wouldn't have been the case. But yet, when we start talking about privilege and we look at that white men can essentially go into a building with rifles or whatever type of weapons they had and have that encounter and just be able to leave when they're done. Yeah. I know Tim Wise talks a lot about that exact scenario. Let's flip it around, and what would it look like if we changed the race of the individuals that were involved in that? So teaching from those points, I think, is valuable. It's still very sad and very scary, and I don't like that they're so available to me, but at the same time, I think that students can no longer sit back and just deny what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you make a good point too about, it seems like, even 10 years ago, we'd get an article or two per semester that people heard about, that, everybody would spread around the university or spread around our colleagues. But now it's almost like you get 10 articles a day, that people are producing, just showing. I mean, I don't know, continue to expose or continue to now have more competent people out there. I mean, I don't know. I wonder, what is COVID-19 pandemic, as you've spent this time shelter in place, reflecting, thinking, I mean, what has this time told us about our nation in your perspective, as you look at where we've been as a country, where we are now, where we're going, particularly in the field of education or parenting or community, wherever you want to take it? I'm just wondering, what are you reflecting on as you look at what has been going on these last 60 plus days, shelter in place? What has it been telling you? What's some of your reflection as you look at the next 25 years?
Wow. Well, I definitely see, with the constant awareness, I see the divide is scarier. I mean, I see it in this sense that we've gone from a society, and I'm going to use like the 1960s, where there was such a divide and so much blatant racism and isms that existed, to, I want to say, more of a covert racism that became very covered up. It was still happening, but it was happening in almost like a very backstabbing type way. And now I see it, especially during this pandemic, it has become back to this blatant like hate. And that's really hard, because it is almost a repeated history. And where do we go when we have this blatant attacks on individual, where somebody walking down the street has no problem screaming racist profanity at someone and think it's okay? And so that's what I've seen happen, and it almost feels like it's getting stronger and more out in the open, to the extent where I think people are feeling, and I don't think this just started with the pandemic. I do believe that it has been happening over the last few years, it's okay to be racist. Let's all be racist, and let's be really verbal about our racism, and we're going to get support for being verbal about our racism. And that's a hard thing to go up against. As you're aware, it's just, I see it as more of a divide and less as a, I don't know, it's not a coming together. So where do I see that 25 years from now? Well, if history repeats itself, we'll go back into some kind of covert racism. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The more generations that we teach about similarities and differences, and that all of those spaces are okay, I think the better that we're going to do. So we know that change occurs between generations and not within them. More changes are occurring between them. So the more we continue to teach younger generations, the more willing and the more able they are to see and value those similarities and differences. So when you think back to when you went to school, grade school, we don't talk about these things. It is being talked about now. Maybe not at the level that I, as a professor, would like it to be talked about in the school system, but we're addressing it. So what will that look like 25 years from now? Well, we might have a lot more issues being addressed in the school, which is helpful. It's a starting point. Will we be, I know you asked this question when you came out to consortium, will we be done with racism in 25 years? No, I do not agree that that will be done. I think we will be in a different space. And I think that I can only hope that more allies and more people are gathering around this topic to talk about this topic and educate others. But I still see that almost that string of divide. There'll still be this hate and this nastiness in another space that continue to think that, privilege is it and I am the stuff and no one else is. And that's just disheartening.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about white women and their role during this time, because I think we all as a community, collectively, collaboratively need to be doing some things together. But there can be some times when folks, based on their affinity, can be working and doing some things strategically because they can have some access and some opportunities that others can't have. So that being said, what do you think is the role of white women at this time where we may be seeing, as you, I think, so eloquently pointed out, I mean, racism, like at the highest level, more visible than we've ever seen it in our time. Our kids have seen it, our teachers have seen it, our schools have seen it. I mean, so we're in some really unique and challenging times, and I think that's going to require all of us to do some things differently at a different level. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about the role of white women during this time that we see some real work needed on the part of us, those of us who are trying to create the kind of society we want our kids to live in and thrive in?
I think, it starts with self. What am I willing to put out there in my own space? So if I'm socially distant, if I'm on lockdown or in my own space, what areas do I have access to? And so the first thing that pops to my head is always social media, right? That is the first thing that I can, I don't want to say influence my small bubble or my small circle. And so that's an important piece, right? So if I'm influencing my own circle, then that's a starting point. It's not the end point, but it's definitely something that white women in general can do. Can I influence my small circle? And what does that look like to influence my circle? It's not just talking about race, it's really paying attention to, the things that I'm saying. So I'm going to go real kind of middle class white woman right now sitting in a pandemic saying, oh, I need to get my hair done. I need to get my nails done. I need to get, my beauty stuff squared away. I'm getting really, really tired looking the way that I look. So, okay, let's start thinking about who has to go to work first to make those things happen for us. And what groups am I putting in a kind of an unsafe situation so that I can look pretty? And I think that looking at those kind of things, again, expanded out. We're saying we want the economy to reopen, but asking to go back to work. Who is currently working right now? Again, besides the doctors and nurses, everybody knows the doctors and nurses are working, but we're not paying attention to the folks that are cleaning the hospital. We're not paying attention to the folks that are working to clean all of these different facilities, the people that are driving around our Amazon packages, the people that are out there being exposed constantly. And all I'm thinking about is I want to get my nails done. I want to get my hair done. And I'm not thinking about those areas. So I think as white women, we have to start thinking about who kind of our demands are affecting. And so where do I put that? I can put that on social media. I can start talking about those things. Am I influencing people on social media? I have no idea. They could just unfriend me, right? They don't have to listen to me anymore. They can decide, I don't know what you're talking about. Or they can pay attention. And so it's up to them, right? I can only influence who I can influence. And I think that is something I've learned over time is as a teacher, of course, I want to teach everybody, but not everybody wants to learn. And so that is definitely the challenge. So I know that was a roundabout way of not really answering your question.
Oh, no. I think it's a discussion that we're trying to have because I think we're in different times. I think everybody is admitting and talking about the new normal. Things are different. The pandemic is blah, blah, blah when it comes to society and the things around us. And I think it's now time, after, at least for me and us here at our house, 60 plus days of quarantine, to start thinking about, okay, we're gonna eventually emerge from here. So what's our action plan? How are we gonna give back? Where are we gonna push back? I mean, all those kinds of things. And so that's just really kind of the kind of conversation I'm asking people to at least let's get started. Mm-hmm. We're gonna have to do some things together, but there's gonna be some places and spaces where folks are gonna have to do it in their affinity. And so that really helps. What about the next 10 years? What can we expect from you, Doc, as you look at your next 10 years of life, either at the university there or you got other plans, research, books? What's on the horizon when you think about the next 10 years?
Well, by then 2 kids through college, right? And then one getting ready to go. So I will still be at the university in 10 years. I think I figured out 15 more years or something like that for sure at the university. But I think that one of the things that I'm very proud of is being part of a department that utilizes social justice as its core. And we've done everything possible to figure out how to integrate that into every single lesson a student gets. So to me, having that support and that backing through our university and our department has been huge. It's why it takes me 2 hours to drive to work when I can leave my home. And I think that it's a really important fact for me that I do drive past many universities to get to the one I work with because of the support of doing this type of work. So I think that's first and foremost. I have a lot of support to continue running consortium with or without social distancing. So we are going to be running consortium starting again in the fall, and it may look a lot different, and it may be virtual or it may be social distanced, but it is the support that this type of work is important that I'm going to continue to do at the university level. As far as research works on, as we think of projects, that's what we do. My focus right now is really looking at is teaching students. I'm actually taking a sabbatical this summer. Not that I'm not already on a sabbatical from the university, but the work that I'm going to be doing is looking at when we're teaching students social justice infused throughout their entire program and all of the different isms, is it creating more advocacy in themselves? Are they getting out there and doing the work that they say theoretically that they're going to do? Are they actually doing it once they get out in the field? Another area of research that we're looking at is a project on broaching. How do you broach and making sure that you're broaching race and you're broaching gender and you're broaching ageism, all these different isms within counseling. So it's really easy for me and you to sit down. We have a nice conversation. If you were my client, but I forgot to ask you about race because I thought because you came to see me, I didn't think it was important. So when we're talking about broaching, we're talking about that idea of making sure that a counselor is talking about those topics that are a component of your identity, which is very easy for counselors to shift around, especially in their early work, is because they're not comfortable broaching topics. So that's an area of research that we're going to be really looking at in the next probably 2 or 3 years. After that, I don't know. Still looking at putting together a whiteness activity book. And when I say that, what I mean is all these different creative lessons that we've come up with surrounding how we effectively teach students about race and racism, kind of putting together a book that shows all those activities. So somebody else could pick it up and say, okay, here's an activity. I could try this and see how this works in my environment or my setting. So that's a future goal. It's out there. It's been there for a while. It's just one of those more complex things to put together.
Yeah. So if you were speaking to all the counselors in the land, during this time and giving them one or two pieces of advice about how they should be either talking with their students or what they should be paying attention to when they're working with young people during this time, what would be your advice to the counselors across the nation as we continue to experience this pandemic and really needing to maybe address some real needs that our kids are facing during this time?
The first piece is definitely to check yourself, and that's before talking to your students. Really, that constant self-awareness. What are my privileges? What are my disadvantages? So I know what they are going into a conversation. If I don't know that, I don't hear what yours are. I need to be abundantly aware of my own privileges. And then making sure that I'm actually asking those questions. Not, hey, is everybody okay? That's a great question, but you only see half of me, especially in this virtual environment. So if I'm a counselor, I need to be asking questions a little deeper. Like, Eddie, are you wearing pants today? Or you got your sweats on? Because that's going to help me. If you got your pajama bottoms on, maybe you didn't feel that great today. And so you only got half of yourself ready to present yourself to me. I need to be asking those questions too. How are you doing, all of you, not just the part that you are presenting to me through this Zoom conversation. So checking myself first so that I can start asking those questions about you. If I'm not going to be able to help you very much either. So I need to check me.
Yeah, I like those two hashtags. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, and pajama bottoms. I like that. I like that. Let me ask you one last thing before we let you go, Tina. We've been asking people, is there anything you've been watching or listening to or reading during this time that you would suggest you would add to our list? We're creating a what to watch, what to read, what to listen to during pandemic, just because people have found themselves with a little extra time. Is there anything you've discovered you want to share? It could be something you learned something from or something you just have used to take yourself away.
Great question. Yeah, I've just been spending some time in the sun when the sun comes out. That has been my big thing. I think that always you have a plethora of resources out there. So I don't know that I've read a few, what are they, young adult novels lately that for me as a white woman, they were helpful to read. They are, I can send them to you. One is On the Come Up and the other one was by the same author, and I have to think of the name of the other one, but they were both very educational in nature, but they weren't educational books. They were just young adult novels, and I thought they were very helpful for me to continue reading the work of Black women that they're putting out, just for me to have that part of my just learning, always learning. So yeah, those were the two books that kind of went through my head. Other than that, getting out, and for me, it's running, making sure I'm running every day so that I can keep my brain in check.
Yeah. Well, all of those are important things. In addition to some consumption, we got to get out and exercise, walk, run, whatever it needs. Sunshine.
That's right.
For sure. So, listen, Tina, we appreciate you hanging out with us, having a little coffee, sharing a little bit about your work, your life's work, and some of your thoughts and philosophies. And I just want to appreciate all the support you've shown me and the conference. And as long as you'll be a collaborator, we'll collaborate with you.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, take care of yourself. Peace.